You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Well, listeners, we have a very special treat for you today because we don't just have one author, we have two. Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen are the #1 New York Times best-selling authors of The Wife Between Us, An Anonymous Girl, You Are Not Alone, and The Golden Couple, which they're here to talk with us about today. The Wife Between Us has been optioned for film by Amblin Entertainment, with Greer and Sarah hired to write the screenplay. Wow. An Anonymous Girl and You Are Not Alone have been optioned for television, with Greer and Sarah tapped as the executive producers. Is that exciting? Prior to becoming a novelist, Greer served as vice president and senior editor of Simon & Schuster, and Sarah worked as a journalist covering Capitol Hill and then with the prestigious Baltimore Sun. I have to say, Sarah's first novel sold to Simon & Schuster, and guess what happened? Greer became the editor, they became quick friends, and here we have the power writing team that is bringing all these wonderful thrillers to us. So we're happy that you two united. Thank you. I want to also add that Greer and Sarah have been featured on interviews in the New York Times, the Hollywood Reporter, the Publishers Weekly, and on Good Morning America. Very impressive. We are so excited to talk to you about this phenomenal thriller, The Golden Couple, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Ooh, what an introduction. I'm just floating now. I've been having a very unglamorous morning, but you turned it all around.
Well, that's our goal, because we vet the books very carefully and we choose books that we love and also books that inspire. And you did all of that. Thank you so much.
Well, we like to give our listeners a little bit about the factual background of the book without giving away any spoilers. So if you'll allow me, I'd just like to just tell everybody a little bit about it, and if you want to add anything at the end, you're absolutely welcome. But this is a fantastic thriller about betrayal, trust, and justifications for wrongdoing. Marissa and Matthew Bishop seem to have it all. They're good looking, they have money, they have a sweet-natured son, but that happens until Marissa cheats. And she wants to make this marriage work. They are referred by a friend to a therapist, Avery, who is a bit of a maverick. In fact, Avery lost her license due to her controversial methods. She is not traditional, but she is successful, and she's nursing some hurts of her own. As the Bishops start to work with Avery, the secrets begin to reveal themselves and unravel in this book, and pretty soon it is not just the marriage that is in danger. Would you like to add anything to our little bit of a backdrop without spoilers?
That was a great introduction.
Absolutely.
Okay, we got it covered. So this is tough. This is always a tough interview because we can't give away any spoilers. And we really want to talk about everyone that we suspected and all the little red herrings that you gave us. And I had suspected almost everyone at one point or another, because I'm sort of the believer of suspect the least likely character. So I go on all kind of trails. But here's my first question for you. I love the character Avery. So for our listeners, she plays the role of the marriage counselor. And she says 3 things that just struck, I believe, all of us, we readers, so strongly. She says, first, people tend to extend more trust to individuals who are attractive. Studies have proven this. She says, appearances can lie. She says, 1% of the population is composed of psychopaths. And most of them aren't the homicidal criminals we envision. We've all encountered these people, people who seem charming and charismatic, but who lie without remorse and manipulate and deceive. Wow. In your story, some characters were very fooled by appearances, and it proved the trouble that we can encounter when we focus on appearances. And we, as the reader, we bring these novels into our own real worlds. And I could not help but think, even in real life, why do we put so much emphasis on appearance? How can we protect ourselves from falling into this trap? And is this something that maybe you have encountered that caused you to write this little bit of wisdom here?
Well, I think I'm so happy that you picked up on that theme, because that was really one of the main themes that we wanted to explore in this book. The whole idea that appearances can be so deceiving. And I think with the advent of social media, it's just become even more, because everyone, you post on Instagram and you've got this perfectly curated life, and we all know those families, right? It's like the husbands, and the wife that seem like they've got the perfect marriage and the perfect child. And so, and certainly Marissa and Matthew live up to that. So that was something that we definitely wanted to explore. Here comes the puppy. Okay. So I'm not sure that I'm like
We are
equipped.
pet friendly. No worries.
We've had kids, we've had birds, we've had dogs, and we take everything. Come on in.
Right. It looks perfect, but like he probably just pooped in the other room. Right. So, but so, I mean, I guess I'm not really sure that I'm equipped to give advice on how to like protect yourself from like a true psychopath. But I do think what Avery is trying to teach the couples, to teach everybody, is, to be true to trust your instincts. And like, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. So that's, but that definitely was one of the themes. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that statistically, we all know a psychopath, sociopath. There's a book I'm reading right now that's called The Sociopath Next Door. Very cheery title, very uplifting. And it says that 1 in 25 people has no conscience. They're not homicidal, because obviously our population would dwindle if they were. I mean, they would start to outnumber us. But, we still encounter them, and they still can wreak havoc in our lives. So what I would like to put out there, I'm very intrigued by the notion of dangerous people and how to avoid them. I think your gut is your guide. We all have it, that little voice that just warns us something is off. And it can be something very small. Like, just to pull an example out of thin air, like say you have, a new neighbor who comes over one day, you don't immediately answer the knock. They let themselves into your house. And that moment is pivotal, because your instinct will give you a warning. This person is pushing past your boundaries in every possible way, and they want to see how you react. But we're socialized to be polite, so we might laugh it off with a quick comment or even ignore the intrusion, and then things can escalate. And while this person may not be physically dangerous to us, they can again, turn our lives upside down, cause us a great amount of stress and pain. Mm-hmm. And I think even Avery, who's like our tough maverick main character, she fell prey to this syndrome, kind of the nice girl syndrome. She was on an elevator, and a man came and right after her, and she let herself be sealed inside the elevator, even though her instincts were warning her something was off. So to really, to avoid falling prey to someone, I think just worrying less about being nice and being true to yourself is the way to go.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Now, Sarah, you're a little low with the volume. I don't know if you can turn it up or speak a little closer to the mic, because we don't want to miss a word that you're saying. But I so much related to that for our listeners. She was saying that one of the main characters, Avery, was stuck in an elevator, had a weird feeling about someone who entered, had an opportunity to get out, but didn't get out. And I love what you said. What could you call it? Gut instinct? Sixth sense? People call it all sorts of different things. But what your story sort of showed us was, don't take light of it. Don't just pass it off as nothing. Maybe it is something. And more often than not, we do have an unusual feeling with people who enter our lives. And that's an excellent answer. Thank you for that. Just to take notice of strange feelings and things that just don't seem right. This is sort of something we would tell our children, really. You know, be careful and watch out and this sort of thing. But I just love that was the thriller part of this book, was that the characters were some very deceiving, and you weren't sure which were, so you were even trying to unravel the layers of who these people were to see who they were underneath. It was wonderful. Thank you.
I mean, of course, also, oh, sorry. And I was just going to say that, of course, this book is fiction. So we had to create, all the characters had to have a sense of mystery, even though without any spoilers, some of them weren't as bad as you might think. But that's our job, right? We can't just have, someone be suspicious of one person, or that would be a really boring read. So that's, something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, is like how to, create that, visceral, palpable tension with many of the characters.
I'm thinking of The Office, the person you most medium suspect.
You medium
suspect.
Yeah. And, going to Sarah's point, there's a book called The Gift of Fear, and it really is an excellent book, but also it's exactly what you were describing. That is a gift.
I love that book. I recommend that book all the time. I give it as a gift to new parents. It is one of the most important books out there. The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker.
That's right. I can't believe you would do that, because I do that to my daughter and her friends. I made them all read it. But excellent points. In your story, Avery is a therapist who, as we mentioned earlier, has lost her professional license. And I think without those professional constraints, she's a little bit more free to employ some maybe questionable methods. She follows up on people, her clients. She maybe stalks them a little bit. She doesn't believe what they say and take it at face value. And I think she maybe thinks that counseling needs some more of these maverick approaches. And I was wondering if you think she is happier now that she's able to exercise her craft more freely. And is she right? She's got kind of an outsider's view of an inside situation. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think she's definitely happier now. Avery had a conventional life. She had an unsatisfying marriage before she changed everything up. And now she loves her life. And it was so much fun to write a character who broke all the rules. Avery sees the flaw of traditional therapy in that, for her, it seems too gentle and too slow. So in her new method, her 10-session method, she can truly zero in on what's going on with the client, and she disrupts their lives to show them what they've hidden, under a rock or under that glossy Instagram photo. And in some ways, I think Avery is right, but her methods are not for the faint of heart. Because if you go to her, your life will look very different when you finish your 10 sessions.
Yeah, I think she even pushes them to the emotional brink, which you don't expect a therapist to do, but it seems to work. Go ahead, Greer.
Well, it's funny as we've been, promoting this book and talking to people, we've asked so many people, how many of you would want to see, an Avery? And most people they would take a chance, and put themselves in her hands, because, 10 sessions to figure out, bad boss, bad marriage, bad, complications with your mother or whatever, like that can be very, very appealing, to many people. And I'm agreeing with Sarah. Like, I do think Avery is definitely, happier, and she believes that this method is better. She says, like, talking alone won't help, and that we could talk, for hours and hours and not solve anything. And so if you're willing to put yourself in her hands, she's there.
I love that. I not only want to see an Avery, I want to be an Avery in my own career and be a little bit more of a maverick, but I've got, lots and lots of ethical responsibilities that govern what I do, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, very much so. I just love that character. Avery said something else. You had all these little golden nuggets that I kept writing down. Oh, now she's saying this. I love this too. At one point she said, sometimes we need to look at our lives from a different angle to recognize the dysfunction and damage certain relationships are causing. Then Avery says, if I've done my job right, my clients are in a completely different place emotionally and even physically when I'm finished counseling them. At the end of the story, Marissa, the other character that we really loved and empathized with and rooted for, is in a completely different place. And it wasn't easy for her to get there. But I thought to myself, in the real world, you can't help but say to yourself, do we all need to step back and survey our lives every now and then? This is sort of a healthy practice that you've put out for us here. But then, isn't it a two-step? And same as with the character Marissa. You can survey your life, and if you have the courage to take a look at what it really is, you have to have the courage to be able to change it. Was this something you were thinking with this character, Marissa?
I mean, absolutely. And I love that you picked up on all those quotes from Avery. You know, I had a journalism professor once who said you learn more by looking out a window than in a mirror. And I think that that's true, and why it's so important to, you know, to read, to travel, to get outside your world. Because if you see things, if you go about your life in the same way every single day, you're going to see things the same way. Like even if you're walking somewhere, try route. But then, okay, so then that's step one. But then having the courage to change that is, you know, that's a lot. That can be a lot, you know, a lot harder. One of my gurus is a woman named Gretchen Rubin, who wrote The Happiness Project, and she's written like 8 books, and she believes, you know, like living in an atmosphere of growth, right? And but that doesn't always make you feel happy when you're growing and changing. It can be painful. It doesn't feel good while you're going through it, but you know that it will make you happier on the other side. Easier said than done.
Absolutely. Sarah,
Yeah.
do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I'm building on what Greer said about taking the same route every day. I mean, think about how we wake up every day. You wake up on the same side of the bed. You probably reach for your phone. You go down, you get your coffee. You have the same internal conversation going on in your head. Our brains like to settle into predictable grooves, and we tend to sleepwalk through a lot of our lives. And challenging ourselves is one way to become more alive. And I was thinking, just this Sunday, I was reading the New York Times, a wedding announcement, and it said the couple had decided every 5 years they were going to reevaluate their commitment. And so I had two thoughts. I immediately thought, oh, that would be a great book or a great movie. And then I also thought, you know, I bet the relationship will be stronger for it. They're not going to sleepwalk if they know that deadline is coming up.
I totally agree, because we are not the same person that we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15. We hope we're evolving and changing and growing and becoming something better. But if your partner is not doing that alongside of you, or at least respecting it, and I think that happened in the book here a little bit too. We had a little, I don't think that's giving away any spoilers between Matthew and Marissa. Obviously, there were some problems, and were they changing together? That's very interesting. I just want to add, I have moved. I'm not proud of this. My husband says it all the time, and I cringe when he tells people. I have moved 7 times, maybe 8. I've been now at one place for a good while. But I will say, every time I got ready to move, I didn't. I said, okay, we've got to do it. It had a lot of anxiety. There were a lot of uncertainties, but I embraced it. And when you do, when you look at change in a positive way, you receive positive results. But if you look at it in a negative way, you're going to get what you sort of expect, I think. And the story showed us this a little bit too. It's so many heartfelt truths in here that we could really take into our everyday lives. Just loved it.
Yeah, I want to press in a little bit too on something that you had said, Sarah, about this notion of predictability. You know, none of the characters in your story are very predictable, right? That they keep secrets, they deceive one another, and sometimes they have private motives for some of the decisions they make. But it gives this story an edge throughout, and I loved that about it. And I was wondering what you were thinking in terms of the importance of stability and being able to predict how a person will react in any given situation to a relationship like a marriage.
You know, I think trust is a fluid thing. It gets stronger over time, especially with good communication. And that leads to, as you said, stability, right? But having said that, I also think that everyone keeps secrets, and they can be small or huge. They can be white lies, they can be flat out deceptions, and not all of them are destructive. But when it comes to a person's character, I do think that stability and the predictability to some extent is very important because, we need to know the people closest to us in our lives are dependable and are going to show up for us.
Yeah, that's an excellent
I
point.
think that, yeah, and I think that with people who are, I mean, in books, especially, to read about a very predictable character would not be that interesting. We all know the really predictable people in our lives, the guy who's out there, mowing the lawn every day at, 7 o'clock or whatever. But to read about those people is not interesting. So, when you're choosing characters and developing characters, you need to have them be, somewhat unpredictable to keep the reader on their toes as well.
Oh, absolutely. I remember being in a relationship once, and your dog is echoing this very important truth you just said.
He wants to add something. Yes, he can add it.
and not knowing how this person was going to react in a given situation was very unnerving. All the time I was on edge thinking, am I going to deal with angry person or happy person? I'm not sure. And so I just thought that was such a great aspect of your novel, because when you talk about a thriller and a psychological thriller, that's exactly what we're doing, is keeping people unbalanced for fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, in real life, it's not as fun. And I echo that. When you don't know what you're going to get with somebody, there's like, you'd rather just know someone's going to be, awful or temperamental all the time. But it's that instability, the unpredictability that keeps you, a knot in your stomach.
Well, your characters, I loved all of the characters in this story. They all had several different levels to them, and then you continually revealed little secrets about them. Even Polly, the worker at the boutique, and I wish I could get into it a little bit more, but I loved her character too. She seems so harmless at first. Well, I can't say anything more than that. But do you draw, I know you've probably been asked this question, do you draw upon little bits of characters? I'm sure there's no one that that is that you've written about in this story, but there's probably characteristics, or maybe you're just in a restaurant and you observe someone. Do you take down these little characteristics and say, oh, I'm going to make a character about them?
Yes, our lawyers have advised us to say they're not based on any real I'm kidding. Our characters are completely imaginary, but we do like to look for little snippets, like you said, that person in a restaurant, and say, oh yeah, Jess and an anonymous girl would totally wear those boots. Or, I heard this little piece of dialogue on the subway today between two friends. Like, let's work that in there. That's a great line. Let's put it in the book. So you're always out there gathering, looking for the little shiny bits to weave in. And those are the bits of, real life things that add glitter to your imaginary world.
Absolutely. And so one last question. We have not had two authors together on our show yet. We're thrilled to have both of you. We're so curious, how do you write this together? Does one of you do a rough draft and the other fine tune it? Do you each take a chapter? Can you just give us a little clue how you do that?
Oh my gosh, we've spent whole sessions of being interviewed answering this question, but the short version, I would say, is that Google Docs is the third partner in our collaboration, and that's how we write together is using Google Docs and Google Hangouts. And we, unlike many co-authors who alternate chapters or take on different characters, we made a decision from the first book to write every line together. That's the short version.
Awesome. Wow, amazing. Well, you're doing a fantastic job. We just adore all of your books. And I know that Sarah has a new book coming out called Tonight, being released by St. Martin's Press on August 1st. We want to know what's on each of your radar. Sarah, can you give us a little glimpse about what this new book is about?
We must have learned this. I don't know where you learned this, but it's news. Yes, so Gone Tonight is actually the title.
Gone Tonight, okay.
And yep, it'll be out in just about a year. I don't know what I'm allowed to say about it yet, other than it is the same editor and publisher who does the books that I co-write with Greer. So it's a psychological thriller. It's a story about strong female protagonists, very twisty, turny, and I can't wait to reveal more about it when I can.
Okay. Yes, we did. We did discover this. We have our ways of finding things out. and
Maverick interviewers.
And Greer, how about you individually? What are you working on?
you in a clue.
I'm also working on something, but I can say even less than Sarah because I haven't sold it yet. I wanted to, because I'd never written a full book before writing with Sarah. Sarah had written 7 books on her own. So I think she felt very confident she can go off and, write another book. I'm a little, it's a little bit different writing on my own, but there's a story that I always wanted to tell, and I'm super excited about it and hard at work and more to come.
Oh, we can't wait to see what you both have next. So I want to say to our listeners, you're going to want to connect with Greer and Sarah. You can find them each on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. They have websites where you can even sign up for their newsletter in order to stay in touch and see what's on their radar and what they're up to. Thank you so much for joining us. For our listeners, you are going to love this book. It is a thriller. It is a thrill ride. You're going to fall in love with the characters, and you're going to learn something, maybe even about yourself from this story. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was a great interview. Very good questions. Thank you.
It's a pleasure meeting you both. Just a pleasure. Yes, that's just a great book, wasn't it, Kristen? And you're the one who found this book, and I just loved it. What's your biggest takeaway? I know that struck you even in your law practice with this issue of having to follow the rules when the rules don't apply all the time.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We have so many ethical considerations all the time in dealing with clients and dealing with cases and dealing with the court. And I cannot tell you how many times in my career I've said to myself, I wish that we could just bypass all of this BS and get right to the heart of the matter, because that's where the delays come in and the frustration comes in. And I think Avery, as a character here, didn't have a choice at first about losing her license, but when she did, it was freeing. And I would love to experience that sense of freedom, maybe once in my career. How about you?
Well, I have a pet peeve of following the rules when the rules no longer apply. And you'll find this every now and then in life. And it might be in a restaurant. All the seats are empty. Well, you have to sign in. What's your name? I'm like, well, the seats are empty. Or how about you go to order something and you have to take a numbered ticket and there's no one in the place. We'll take a numbered ticket. Well, why? There's no one here, because that's what we do. We always do it this way. And I think it's people who've been trained in certain businesses, very strictly trained. But for the rest of us, I sit back and say, that doesn't make sense anymore. I think in life, you have to have a little bit of courage to step out of that box, to be the voice that says, those rules were created 500 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 years ago. They don't really apply anymore, or they don't apply to every single situation. Maybe it's time for a change, but I'm with you on that.
Yeah. I'm going to say it's time for a change, and thus we're talking about the Constitution, because I do believe that is a living document that has changed with the times in many respects. But I agree with you about many other rules, especially in the time of COVID, right? We have all different opinions about COVID, certainly, but look at how many rules people rebelled against because they didn't seem to make sense.
Mm-hmm. Every now and then, right? I really was a believer in a lot of the COVID rules, but the one that hit me strongly was I was in a very tightly enclosed restaurant one night and in New York, and we had to wear masks going through the restaurant until we sat at our seat. When we sat at our seat, we could take them off. But the room was so tight and enclosed, you couldn't then use the restroom unless you put your mask back on in order to walk through. This was a great rule that didn't apply to a tight little closed quarter like that. So I guess that's the perfect example. Yeah, you're right. I'm sure our listeners, now that we say this, things are running through your mind where you've encountered the same thing. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up about this book. The character Marissa says about her husband, okay, I don't want to give too many spoilers, who says about a dysfunctional person. I actually don't think it was her husband. I wonder if that's the way he grew up. Did the way he grew up affect his relationships? And I wrote that down because I said, yes, of course. The way we grow up we are a product of our environment, I always say, to a certain extent. I think it's what Sarah and Greer said in this novel. You have to be able to step back now and then and take a look at yourself and take a look at who you are and where you're coming from. Yes, we've all encountered hardships in the past. A lot of them stem from elementary school, grammar school, high school, parents We're not, no parent is perfect, and we can carry these wounds with us the rest of our life, make excuses that this is why I behave this way. I'm sorry, I'm angry because of this. I'm sorry, I can't talk about that because of what I experienced. And I understand all of that and I empathize with that. But at some time, I believe it's freeing to make a conscious effort to say, yes, I suffered with that, but I'm stepping out of there.
Yeah.
I'm not staying there anymore. That's not going to affect me anymore. And I think it requires a conscious effort.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at all of the relationships in your life and they're all a mess and you are that common, denominator, you cannot continually justify your conduct by your past. I grew up this way. We have this entering their national debate right now because of this mass shooting. And the individual who took part in this mass shooting and committed these murders grew up in a dysfunctional household. And it's kind of shining a light on how much of this person's behavior is unavoidable, how much is avoidable. And these are really tricky areas to wade into because now we're looking at justification for wrongdoing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, there's a fine line between I am suffering with some issues because of something from my childhood and I have mental illness because of something from my childhood, where maybe I need professional help, which there's no shame in that, or maybe I need medication. This is what I think of when I think of that shooter. Like, this is pure mental illness in my mind. It's severe dysfunction. But yeah, it can be a very gray area. But I just thought that was so interesting that they had brought that up as well.
Yeah.
So what's on your radar there, Kristen? What are you working on now?
Well, I like this idea of appearances being deceiving. You had brought that up in one of your first questions, and I thought that was such an interesting theme running through this book. So I have been kind of going back and looking at relationships in my past where how much emphasis I put on the appearances and the things on the outside versus what I learned later, because I want to do better going forward. And I'm a person who tends to trust first, and I don't do that as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
How
That's
about you?
An excellent point. Well, I like what you said about that. That's another pet peeve of mine. I really, really disdain this fact that better looking people get the job. More attractive people are thought to be more intelligent. I really hate that. And I've never been one who is only drawn to attractive people. I never have. I really feel maybe this is my childhood because I was goofy as a kid. I wasn't the popular kid. I was kind of odd looking back. I mean, I thought I was cool, but I guess I really wasn't now, hindsight. But I was like real too tall and really too skinny, and I had glasses, and I was just kind of an odd kid. But I have a heart for every kind of person. In fact, on the opposite, I probably gravitate to the more unusual people than your typical movie star type. I like the unusual people.
Or the underdog.
Or I'm very big on the underdog, very big. That's my motto pretty much. I always root for the underdog.
Yeah.
So, well, this was a great interview. I just love this book. Listeners, you're going to want to read The Golden Couple by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. And please, just a little shout out to our unbelievably talented sound engineer, the Mr. Mark Carey. Here he is, always.
Hope you guys enjoyed today's show, and see you again next week.
Thanks, Mark. Always making us sound good and even look good, and lighting and everything else. So we have a few storm predictions to leave you with to pique your interest. Some of these books you can read and some aren't out yet, because Kristen and I are thrilled to get the advanced reader's copy and a little jump on some of these novels. We're going to be interviewing Ellen Marie Wiseman and the Lost Girls of Willowbrook, Girl Forgotten with Karen Slaughter, Chris Pavone, Two Nights in Lisbon, and Madeline Martin, The Librarian's Spy.
And remember, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep with life-changing fiction.